Okay, students, this is a virtual guest lecture to supplement the lecture I've already done on public relations. And we have a very special guest who's going to speak with you from some informed firsthand experience. So introduce yourself and then tell the students what you do.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everybody. My name is Faryar Borhani. I am the Chief Communications Officer for a company called Encore Capital Group. We're headquartered here in San Diego, but we are a publicly traded global company. We operate in 9 different countries, have about 8,000 employees globally, and we're in the financial services space. So as a Chief Communications Officer, I set the public relations and communication strategy for the company globally in all the countries that we operate in. I also manage all of our internal communications and environmental, social, and governance efforts, which is very closely tied to reputation management, which we can talk about if you'd like.
Okay, the global aspect is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
But before we get into that, say young person, early 20s, that
Yeah.
age, they graduate, they want to work in public relations or strategic communications. What kind of jobs might they find and what kind of things would they be asked to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fabulous question, and it's changed quite a lot over the years. I think digital and social media has really broadened the landscape of what's really possible. I think traditionally you can think about it in 2 different ways, right? One is you can work for a public relations firm or an agency. The other is you could work for a company in-house and be sort of the public relations practitioner for that company. In both cases, you're really expected to do a lot of research on what type of messaging would do really well for that company or client that you're helping. So you'll use social or digital media to sort of gather a lot of that primary and secondary research. You'll put together a lot of messaging on campaigns and initiatives or products people are trying to really position in a better way. You might also be really required to help with the messaging on internal communications, actually. So, often when people think about public relations, they think about it as an external thing. It's actually communications to all stakeholders, as we know, and your employees are a big part of it. So if you're in-house, you'll be crafting emails, managing an intranet perhaps, which is really the internal website for employees to access, creating content like videos or infographics. You might be working with media to make sure that the company that you work for or the client that you're helping is captured and described in the right context, and really the thing you want to shine shines. So there's a lot that a young professional will be exposed to early on, but really it's about making sure that you have the right research to inform better communications decisions.
I do want to ask about social media, but before, the
Yeah,
global aspect is stuck in my mind.
yeah.
Um, how does that work when you craft a message? How often do you have to change it for different markets, or do you have people in the different markets? Because I know there's different cultural sensitivities. How do you accommodate that with such a
Yeah,
large
100%.
organization?
Yeah, so for us, we have a team of about 20 people. They're scattered across all these countries that we operate in. And so we have people on the ground who are sort of keeping a pulse on what's really important. What do we have to message on any given day? What's sort of the thing that we need to explain to people? What's the action that we're trying to ask them to take? We start sort of every quarter with key messages. They need to be the same across our company. And then we say, okay, well, those key messages will obviously look very different in language, but they will also need to be delivered in different ways depending on who we're communicating to and in what country. So I'll give you an example. In France, people care quite a lot about hearing the messaging from their leaders. So we have to make sure that the people within the company are trained to speak in the right way. They don't want to get it in an email. They don't want to get it on social media or digital media. They want to hear from their person. If we want to communicate to investors that we have in the U.S., we might do it a completely different way. And so it's really interesting. I mean, you have to learn a lot about culture. You have to learn a lot about the people on the ground. And you, of course, need to be proficient in the language, because if we get typos wrong and we say something incorrectly, trust me, people will notice. So it's really important.
Okay. You mentioned different ways to get the message out. I wonder if you could talk about social media
Yeah.
in terms of how it's used as a tool, both as a way to sort of get messages out, but is it also a useful tool to collect information?
For sure. So I'll start with the collection piece, right? I mean, I think, we work in this we live in a 24/7, 365 world now. Everything is innately measurable because it's digital, right? So we can see how often people are looking at content, when they're looking at that content, what they look at first, second, or third when it comes to a website or even your social media pages. We can tell what type of language we need to put out there so people can actually then click on a piece of content, right? So all of these things are measurable for us. And you need specific tools. You need to be trained in specific tools that will collect all this information. But collecting the information is only one part of this, right? And often, I talk to young people who are graduating and entering the workforce for the first time. And the one thing I always hear is, I got into communications because I don't love math. I got into PR because I don't love math. Trust me, you need to know math and you need to be data proficient to really be a good practitioner, right? So you have to really understand through social and digital, if you're getting engagement rates or impression rates and that type of thing, that's what's going to make your communication or PR campaign that much more successful. So we use social and digital to capture and collect a lot of this data, and then we'll use it to create and then disseminate our content, right? So we, as I was saying earlier, we know now on certain days what content performs the best. Is it going to be a photo? Is it going to be a video? Is it going to be a person in the photo? Do we need to make sure that we have certain colors in those images? All of this is data that we have, and it's content that we create based on that data. So social and digital is incredibly important. And then, of course, you have disinformation and misinformation, which you still need to be really, really cognizant of too. So we know that there's good data and there's bad data, and we really need to make sure that we understand sort of the environment in which we're operating so we can make better decisions off of it.
Could you speak a little bit about ethics, I guess? Because I know that with any form of communication, there's the importance of ethics. Just because you can communicate
right
when you need to, or just because you have information doesn't mean you should communicate it. What are some sort of ethical quandaries or ethical issues specific to the kind of work that you do?
I mean, I think, often the cliche is, right, like, public relations practitioners are kind of spin doctors, right? And we've heard that term a lot, I'm sure, if you follow the industry. And, some of that is self-inflicted and probably deserved at times for people who are maybe unethical, right? You should never be, the truth is the truth, right? People are going to find out the truth one way or the other, right? So I think the one thing that we always think about is there is this journalism sort of integrity that we need to follow. We are journalists, actually. We are telling a story. We have to collect information. We have to disseminate that information in the right way and ethically. If we're communicating on behalf of our company, let's say in a variety of countries, that's millions of people that will see this information. They can just as easily figure out if what we're saying is true or not true. And if that happens, well, we're in really big trouble if we're saying something that is not factual, not accurate, and we, unethically sort of position it in a way where we look better and it's anything but the truth, right? So I think, whatever way you look at it from a PR perspective, you really need to think about yourself as a journalist too. That's how I see it, and follow the sort of the ethical criteria of what collecting a story and telling a story really is. We're not spin doctors. We're not trying to create new facts. We're just trying to make sure that people have all the facts and can make better informed decisions. We might set things up in a different way. We might lead with different facts. We certainly get to be selective in that way, but it's all the same. Here's the thing. So the way I've been asked this question before, I think every company needs to really understand and answer for itself. What does it stand for? I mean, that's just true to a core, right? So every company has a mission, vision, and values. And when you deviate from those, it gets really, really difficult to manage different activities, campaigns, ways people sort of get outside of the guardrails on that. You should really be staying true to mission, vision, and values. You uniquely as a company can make a difference if you stay close to your mission, vision, values. I can't speak for why Bud Light sort of made the decisions that they did. I think they genuinely believed that if you listen to their marketing lead, it was going to help a stale brand sort of recreate itself a little bit, right? And so that's good. More power to them. I think as communicators, marketers, PR practitioners, that's what we're trying to do every day, is try to make a brand more relatable, understood, et cetera. I think, social and digital media, though, has an ability to sort of take things rapidly out of context and at a velocity that people can't really control. And I think that's exactly what happened with Bud Light. I think they, if the way I understand it, this was a small campaign. This was not a big campaign from them to begin with. And then people got hold of it. People on different sides who didn't agree with what they were doing completely blew it out of proportion. I think people completely misunderstood really the intent there. But I think what happens for every brand is, and this happened with Target not too long after this, right? Where there's a vacuum. You either need to fill that very quickly yourself as a brand, or people will fill it for you. And that's what we often think about as a PR practitioner, right? So misstep, maybe, depending on who you ask, that's what they'll say. They should have maybe done the campaign in the first place. That's not my place to judge. But what I can tell you is how they communicated after the fact was incredibly slow. I thought they did a bad job communicating whether they were for something or against something. And that's what I mean when you have to have mission, vision, and values and be kind of clear on that, right? If you looked at the CEO's response afterward, he didn't speak for it or against it. He just sort of danced around it. And I think that's really important. If you're going to do something, stick by it. If you're not, say exactly why. So every company is going to have to make that judgment for themselves, for sure.
All right, final question. If you could give advice, 1 or 2 points of advice to any student who might be listening to this and saying, hey, I want to do what this person does. What could a student do in their their point in education right now?
Yeah. Well, look, I think I'll go back to the point I made around being a strong journalist, right? I think if you want to be in PR communications, you need to have a strong foundation of writing and really understanding how to create a story. I mean, that's your storyteller. You're a storyteller at the core. Then you need to add to that toolbox a variety of things related to business, right? We absolutely need to understand if you're servicing a client or you're in-house, what's driving the operations, what's really the business value proposition, how are you going to help that business tell its story? You can't do that unless you understand the business, so that's critical. The other part is, as I said earlier, get really versed in the math, right? I mean, don't shy away from numbers. That's incredibly important. It's not to get too in the weeds here, but communications is one of those things where people, if you're at a company or a client, you need budget to do it really effectively. It's really expensive to do big campaigns. The only way you prove value is through the metrics, right? So get comfortable with the metrics. And I think the last thing is just have a growth mindset, right? Our space changes rapidly. Yeah, you need to have that core foundation of being a good writer and storyteller, but every year there's a new trend, there's a new thing, there's a new tool. If you sort of stay flat and you're not open to learning more, you're going to be way behind. And I think digital and social is obviously accelerating that, and has been for the last decade. So, it's an interesting place, but certainly focus on those things, and I think people will do well.
All right, thank you so much. I think that's very helpful.